Hey now, PD Grizz here. What it is, how goes it? How are you doing today? I hope you are doing exceptionally well, because I certainly am. Because today, after getting up bright and early this morning and doing some flounder fishing and doing okay, didn't catch a whole lot, did catch one keeper though, so that was a good time. I don't get to go out fishing much, but then I got home and had this little baby waiting in the mail for me. This is a Boker 182, and it's got a little story with it. You know, any good knife has a good story. A good story makes a great knife, is my belief. I found this one on eBay. These are usually these can be pretty pricey. I believe new they're over $200 US, and used, I mean, I see them going for $150 and more all the time, depending on whether they're vintage or modern. But I thought this was a modern one. It was caked in concrete and had a majorly broken clip blade when I saw it. And I was thinking about it for a while, and I actually wanted a Remington version of this humpback design, the Remington 3843, and there was one up for sale, but I just, I had my money tied up in something else. I couldn't afford to swing for that knife at that exact time, so I'll have to wait for another one of them. But then I came upon this and was like, that's a good consolation prize right there, especially for the price. I got this for an insane deal. And mind you, I expected it to be a knife from the 90s. However, I now believe it is possibly from the 60s, you know, roughly. Boker's notoriously tough to date, and I am by no means an expert at Boker knives, or any knives for that matter. This is completely new, so this is all stuff I'm learning right now. But anyway, let's check this bad boy out. First of all, it's got Delrin covers, which I believe they did not use on later knives. They went back to using real stag or bone or wood. I don't think they have a Delrin offering anymore. So that right there is a hint. And that they call this, you know, jig. It was meant to look like jig bone, but they call it tree bark Delrin. But notice it has the nickel silver bolsters and bail, nickel silver pins, with what I presume is a brass or some kind of gold colored metal shield, with the little tree in it. That's a trademark of theirs. I believe going back to the 1930s, although I might be incorrect on that. Has the Soul Engine stamp. And looking at some examples, they still use this basic badge to this day. But the modern one, there's no way this camera is going to be able to do it justice. But on the modern ones, the lines in the background are not nearly as fine. It's like, I don't know, you know, how they cast these or stamped them or whatever, but they put a little more effort back in the day into making these really fine lines behind the tree. And on the modern ones, the lines are nearly 2 to 3 times as thick and not nearly as finely done. So, I mean, that's a big hint right there. Notice the bail has some decorative elements to it. It's got like a X cut into it and a couple of lines and stuff. Pretty cool, just a little extra workmanship here. It has a giant corkscrew, kind of. That is a big boy of a corkscrew. Here, let's look at a Victorinox corkscrew for comparison. And you see the corkscrew is quite a bit longer, a little beefier. The newer ones have like these flattened wire looking corkscrews. They kind of look thicker, like on the outsides they're flatter. I don't know how to describe it, but these older ones look more like a typical wire corkscrew. Notice the brass liners, very cool, very thick brass spacer and brass liners. That's super cool to see. Check out this reamer. Bam, look at that. Interesting reamer. This is not dull. That is how they come. It's more designed as, it's kind of like a quarter round hole punch. It's definitely an effective tool for making a hole in leather, which is what those European style awls were really all about. You know, they were a leather punch, but they designed them so they could do more functions. This is basically designed to be a reamer or a leather punch. That would punch a nice, you could punch this way and then turn it around and punch that way and punch a really clean, well-shaped hole with the tip of this. So rather than just digging in with the tip and forcing open a hole that will stretch out around the sides if you just have a reamer that doesn't actually punch it out. And notice the inside has gun bluing on it. And these are carbon steel tools, but this is something I've seen in other videos. You know, I've never found a good answer for why they put it in there. I think it might has to do with just trying to prevent rust in that area, because I guess it's hard to get to, or particularly important, you know, because of the machining. Kind of like the Victorinox files, they tend to rust in the cuts and stuff. So maybe that has something to do with it. I really don't know. Really strong tension on those back tools, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. We've got the old school can opener. Notice it, even the can opener has the little tree on it. Remember that little tree, that'll come back. Now we've got the cap lifter. The cap lifter is a bruiser. Has some serious spring tension on it, and I have no doubt that is by design to try to prevent it from popping on you while you're driving a screw with it or prying with it or whatever. Again, notice it does have the little tree stamped in it. Very cool. Finally, here we get to the one downfall of this guy. The clip blade was in horrific shape when I got it. Literally, it was a lot taller than this, but out towards the middle of the nail nick, a big chunk was taken out of the edge, and then the whole tip was snapped off. So this is what I could do with it, which is like, it's not terrible. It certainly is still a serviceable blade. I'm not real happy with it, but I left it kind of rough looking. It just looks like how the blades, when they've worn down after many years of use. So that's kind of the look I went for with this, rather than trying to make it perfectly straight or whatever. I could have made this a little straighter and come out here and left this a little fuller, but I just kind of worked it on a handstone until it had the look of a knife that's just been resharpened over and over again. Took some major scratches out of it too. And notice we've got the remnants of the tree on that side, and on this side actually has the full tank stamp. Heinrich Boker & Co. Baumwerk, Solingen, Germany, Alemania. And finally, we get to the piece de la resistance, the main blade. Beautiful spear point, drop point, whatever you want to call it. This had a big chunk out of the tip, and I was able to just recontour this edge. I mean, it just had like a thumbnail sized chip out of the edge right here at the end of the blade. So I brought that up a little, brought the edge up a little bit towards the spine. It still tucks in neatly to the scales. So very happy with that. And check out this little etch on the blade. The famous tree brand, Arbolito. Arbolito is Spanish for little tree. Arbor, you know, being the Latin prefix for a tree, arboreus or whatever. And then lito just is basically a little thing. So, little tree. And I think that's a trademark they've had going back to the 30s. Well, I might be wrong about that, as I said. And then Boker and the model number 182. Of course, the main blade has the full tang stamp on it. Heinrich, shortened to H-E-I-N-R, period. Boker & Co. Baumwerk, Solingen, Germany, Alemania. I don't know what all that means, but it sounds pretty cool, right? And we even get a little tree on the back. Super cool. Again, these are carbon steel tools. This blade was coated in concrete. I wasn't sure if the etch was there because the concrete was covering the top of the etch. I didn't know if it was like acid or had been burned in the picture. You know, it's hard to tell from pictures, but I was guessing that it was concrete. And sure enough, a fine sandpaper took it right off, and then I was able to clean it up. I didn't put a mirror polish on this or anything. I kind of like how this looks rough and used and in situ, as an archaeologist might say. But it's super cool. The action on this knife is superb. Like, they really like got it. The action of a knife comes down to two things: the spring tension and the shape of the tang. If the tang has too hard corners on it, it'll make it harder to open and make it snap harder. If the corners are too rounded, it'll make it soft to open. So there's a balance, and when they get the pull just right, the tension, you'll notice it has a lot of tension starting to hold it closed, but as soon as it breaks like 22.5 degrees, it just flows right open. And then as soon as it hits probably 165 degrees or whatever back here, it locks open. So that's exactly what you want. When you go to close it, you can push this blade pretty far down before it'll actually snap. So, your finger's not likely to be under it. It's not going to surprise you, but it still feels great opening. That everything still snaps into place. Great sound to it. Yeah, you can't beat it. So, some other things I want to talk about this is I want to look at the spring design and pivot locations on this versus a vintage Victorinox knife. Now, this is obviously a earlier version of a Victorinox knife, but it'll work for argument sakes because you can actually see the pins on it, and the pin locations haven't changed for Victorinox. Now, if you look at this, you notice, first of all, they're actually the same length, roughly. It's hard to tell on camera. They're actually both 91 millimeters long. Basically, this is the same size and shape with the hump added on. By the way, that hump, you would think you would want the bail on the opposite end away from the blade, but with the blade open and the bail forward, at first I tried it backwards and that was kind of uncomfortable, but with the blade forward, it just gives your thumb the perfect spot to nest into, and it feels extremely comfortable and secure. Like the bail feels like it'll keep you from sliding forward a little bit. The thumb keeps your, it's a great little design right there. I really appreciate that design. But back to the pins. Now, if you look at the corkscrew is longer, so the pivot is farther down the knife, right? And this, you can't hear. Here's another knife. This knife has the same pin locations as the Swiss Army knife, except you can see all four of them. Notice this pin here. That is the pin that the springs act against. When the blades are pushing open, they're pushing the spring down, and this is holding the spring down from just flexing up. Okay? But on this knife, that pin is on the opposite end. So the pin here on this knife is doing the same function as the pin here on this knife, and this pin do the same function. Basically, they've moved this pin from over here, where it would be nearly in the center of the corkscrew, to back here. And the problem is the spring needs to stop from moving up to give tension for the main blades, but it needs to move up to relieve tension to open the bottom blades. So Boker dealt with that by having a slot. If I took this knife apart, the spring would have a little slot here, so it holds the spring laterally, but it allows it to move up just enough. When you open the top blades, it's pushed all the way up. But then when it's relaxed, it's down. And then again, when you open this, it pushes it up. But these tools are much harder to open on the back than on the Victorinox knife. And I think that it was something that Elsner did great and, fixed the that's how little improvements are how things become as iconic as the Victorinox knife. It's a modern change on an old design that many people copied. But the tension on that is a lot less than the tension on this thing. Like, still opens just fine, but a lot more tension on it, and it's because they changed around the pivot locations. They made these tools a little shorter, moved this pivot closer to the center of the knife, and then moved this pin from here to behind the pivot pin. And it completely revolutionized the way these little back tool sprung knives work. So, if anybody has any information about this knife, can tell me how old it is. I'm pretty confident it's in the 60s. I just did some cursory research this afternoon, checked out some threads on all about pocket knives, the usual places, Blade, whatever, Blade HQ, I don't know, whatever, Blade Forums, that's what it is. All about pocket knives. Knife Collector had a thread on it with some pictures and examples for dating purposes, and I'm pretty comfortable with where it's at, but I could be completely wrong. This could be a 2015, reissue that they use the exact same shit on. I don't know. I don't think it is, though. It's got, how an old knife just has that feel. Also, most of the reissues, except for a few, like their limited ones, like the 150th anniversary, I believe, are all steel. Like the very limited ones will be carbon steel. Most of them are stainless steel. They started using stainless steel on the knives in the 70s. I know you can find 60s knives like this with the same etch, but it'll say inox below it for stainless. But I thought this was going to be stainless, but I was pleasantly surprised to see how patinaed it was once I started getting the grime and dirt off of it. So anyway, that is my adventure into the Boker Humpback Model 182. I think it was originally the Model 7593. And another interesting tale of the origin of this knife is, according to Boker lore, amongst the Boker heads, as I'm going to call them, is that Boker has made this knife since 1869. They say they've made a 6-blade camp knife since 1869. The only evidence of this knife ever being sold is as early as, I think, 1928 or 1930. And Remington came out with a suspiciously similar knife I've seen accounts of ads of it as early as 1923. So, so it seems like Remington actually had this out on the market first. I think what Boker did have a 6-bladed camp knife, but I think it was closer to something like this, closer to like a Swiss Army knife, just normal in shape. And then they added the hump later. And the interesting is the Remington version of this, their R3843, was designed by cutlers that came from Boker, that moved from Boker to Remington in the 1920s. So this is not a unique design. Many other German Solingen makers made these. They're not extremely common. They're a little hard to find, but I did find one collector that's got a wonderful collection of these by various German makers, going back to the early 1900s. So very cool design. Just a different way of accomplishing the same features, as a Swiss Army knife. It's not there's more than one way to skin a cat, basically. So that's the end of that. I think I've rambled long enough. Looking at the timer on this video, 17 minutes. Oof. Comment down below if you're still watching this video at 17 minutes. I'm really curious. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. P.D. Grizz out.